Welcome to Past Cast, where we turn politics and history into stories you can hear and remember. This is not just a book about politics. It is a book about denial, loyalty, and the heavy cost of silence. In Original Sin, Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson take us inside the Biden White House during its most fragile years, revealing how resilience became stubbornness and how loyalty turned into betrayal. This is the story of how a presidency declined and how one fateful choice shaped the course of history. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. He totally fucked us. The morning after the 2024 election, Joe Biden woke up with one thought. They pushed me out too soon. I could have beaten Trump. In his heart, Biden felt betrayed. By Obama, by Pelosi, by the media. He told anyone who would listen that the polls had proved him right. But there were no such polls. The truth was brutal. He would have lost, and lost badly. At the vice president's residence, Kamala Harris sat stunned with her family. After just 107 frantic days as the nominee, the networks had called it. Trump was back. Harris would have to concede. For Democrats, blame was clear. Veteran strategist David Plouffe said it flatly, he totally fucked us. Biden had once promised to be a bridge to the next generation. But in 2023, surrounded by loyalists who refused to confront his decline, he ran again. Insiders had already seen the lapses, the freezes, the blank stares, the forgotten names. Still, his team told the world he was fine. And then came June 27th. On stage against Trump, Biden froze, stumbled, faltered. Millions saw what had been hidden. A president no longer in command. It wasn't just a bad night, it was the collapse of the illusion. This, the authors write, was the original sin. Biden's refusal to step aside, his circle's decision to hide the truth. A choice that cost Democrats the White House and left a wound his party may never forgive. But why did he run at all? To answer that, you have to go back to Biden's own mythology, the man who always got up when life knocked him down. Chapter 2. Get up. Joe Biden lived his life by one command from his father. Champ, it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how quickly you get up. He learned it early. As a boy, kids mocked his stutter, calling him Joe Impedimenta. It scarred him, but also gave him empathy. At 29, after winning a Senate seat, tragedy struck. His wife Nelia and daughter Naomi were killed in a car crash. His sons, Beau and Hunter, were badly hurt. Biden thought of quitting, but he got up. In 1988, his first presidential campaign collapsed in scandal. Weeks later, a brain aneurysm nearly killed him. Last rites were given, but he survived and got up again. In 2015, Beau, his eldest son, the one many thought would be president one day, died of brain cancer. Biden was broken, lost. But in 2020, he rose once more, defeating Trump when few thought he could. So when whispers came in 2023 that he was too old, too weak, Biden and his family dismissed them. He had always gotten up. Why would this time be any different? But that very faith, the creed that defined his life, was about to become the trap that ended it. Chapter 3. The Politburo. Every president has an inner circle. For Joe Biden, it wasn't just a circle. It was a wall, a Politburo of loyalists who filtered reality and kept the world from seeing the truth. The signs were there early. In 2020, Biden forgot the name of his closest aide, stumbled in debates, froze on the trail. Insiders whispered about bad days. Still, in public, doubt was forbidden. After Beau's death, Biden drew his circle even tighter. By 2020, 3 men held the keys: Mike Donnellan, the message man, Steve Ricchetti, the loyalist and family friend, Bruce Reed, the policy mind and steady hand. Around them stood Anita Dunn, Bob Bauer, and a handful of trusted protectors. Their job was simple: shield Biden. Age wasn't treated as a limitation, it was treated as a vulnerability to be hidden. Questions about his stamina were not warnings, but betrayals. COVID deepened the cocoon. In Wilmington, aides scripted his Q&As, edited his videos, and kept him away from situations where he might stumble. At year 2020 convention, raw footage of Biden struggling in Zoom conversations horrified staffers. Hours of tape were cut down to minutes that looked polished, if hollow. Some aides walked away angry, convinced they'd been gaslit. Others told themselves it was fine. But the truth was clear. The Politburo's mission was not openness. It was survival. And in 2003, it worked. Biden won. But the wall that protected him also blinded him. And by 2023, when the stakes were even higher, that wall would become a trap for him and for his party. Chapter 4. The Bidenness. To understand Joe Biden, you can't just look at the president. You have to look at the family. Because in Biden world, politics wasn't just strategy. It was the family business. The Bidens were fiercely close. They defended each other instinctively, blurred the line between family and politics, and lived by an unspoken code. Loyalty meant silence. At the center was Jill Biden. Warm in public, fierce in private. She wasn't just First Lady. She was her husband's shield, his fiercest protector. Around her stood Joe's siblings and children. Valerie, who managed his early campaigns. Jim, whose business dealings raised questions. Beau, the heir. And Hunter, brilliant but troubled, whose struggles would haunt the presidency. For the Bidens, denial was survival. Beau wasn't dying until the very end. Hunter wasn't spiraling, he was stable. Doubt was forbidden. Repeated often enough, their stories became gospel. This culture spilled into the White House. Aides who raised concerns about Biden's stamina were sidelined. Never call a fat person fat, the family motto, meant more than kindness. It meant, don't speak hard truths. By 2023, this mindset drove the re-election campaign. Advisors who believed Biden should step aside were shut out. One aide said bluntly, "It was a disservice to the country and the party to let him run again." But inside the bubble, faith replaced honesty. The Bidenness gave Biden resilience and purpose, but it also created blindness, a culture of silence that confused loyalty with denial. And soon, that loyalty would be tested in the most public way possible, the oath of office itself. Chapter 5. I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. January 20th, 2021. The nation was on edge. Just 2 weeks after the Capitol attack, soldiers lined the streets as a 78-year-old Joe Biden stepped forward and spoke the words, I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. It was meant to be a reset, decency restored, democracy steady, Trump defeated. For many, it was catharsis after chaos. But beneath the symbolism lay fragility. Biden was already the oldest president ever sworn in. To some, that meant wisdom. To others, weakness. In his early months, he moved fast, reversing Trump's orders, rolling out vaccines, launching historic spending bills. At times, he looked vigorous, almost Roosevelt-like. Yet those close to him saw the limits: short workdays, early schedules, careful buffers from exhaustion. The signs of strain were faint, but there. And the presidency never slows down. It doesn't bend to age or grief or faith. For that moment on the inaugural stage, Biden looked like the healer America needed. But behind the triumph, a question already hung in the air. Not whether he could rise to the occasion, but how long he could endure it. Chapter 6. The most privileged nursing home in the country. The White House is meant to be the heart of American power. But under Joe Biden, some insiders whispered a darker name, the most privileged nursing home in the country. By his second year, the signs were clear. His walk slowed, his voice weakened, his presence sometimes frail. At fundraisers, he leaned heavily on teleprompters, rapped early, and slipped away before questions could linger. Behind the scenes, aides adjusted. His schedule shrank, his sharpest hours carefully protected. He could still command a room when prepared, but those windows grew smaller. Increasingly, staff behaved less like advisors and more like caretakers. In public, the image was managed: short appearances, edited videos, tightly scripted speeches. The man once known for retail politics now seemed distant, buffered by layers of handlers. To critics, it felt like deception, a cover-up to drag him through one more election. Inside Biden's circle, it wasn't denial, they insisted. It was faith. Faith that he'd rise again, as he always had. But faith has limits. And as 2024 loomed, reality was closing in fast. Chapter 7. Who else is going to do this? Whenever doubts rose about his age, Joe Biden had one answer. Who else is going to do this? By 2023, his circle knew the truth. His energy was fading, his lapses more frequent. But to them, the alternatives looked worse. Harris was unpopular, governors untested, senators uninspiring. Pete Buttigieg? Brilliant, but not ready. So Biden's mantra hardened. Only I can stop Trump. It wasn't just ego, it was conviction. He had beaten Trump before. He believed only he could do it again. Jill Biden and his closest advisors reinforced the idea. Biden was indispensable, the party's only hope. But this faith came at a cost. It silenced debate, shut down challengers, and made questioning Biden feel like betrayal. Who else is going to do this? Became not just a question, but a trap, binding the party's fate to one man whose strength was visibly slipping away. Chapter 8. Dr. Biden. Every president has advisors. Joe Biden had something stronger. Dr. Jill Biden. Not just First Lady, but protector, gatekeeper, and, in many ways, enabler. To the public, Jill was warmth, teacher, steady hand, the human face of the presidency. But inside the West Wing, she was the guardrail. She deflected criticism, challenged staff who doubted him, and made one thing clear: Joe Biden would not be pushed aside. She bristled at whispers about age derailty. To her, they weren't analysis, they were insults. And her voice carried more weight than any strategist or donor. If Jill believed he could keep going, then he would. This dynamic shaped the campaign. Staffers worried about his decline, about the risk of disaster on stage. But often, the First Lady's word overruled them. To her, Biden was still the man who had risen from tragedy again and again, the only one who could stop Trump. In Biden's downfall, Jill wasn't a bystander. She was central, the force who turned private doubts into forbidden questions. Her loyalty was unshakable. But in the end, that loyalty carried a heavy price, for him, for her, and for the party. Chapter 9. Are we sure this is a good idea? By 2023, a quiet question echoed through Democratic circles. Are we sure this is a good idea? 3-0. A quiet question echoed through Democratic circles. Are we sure this is a good idea? Biden was already the oldest president in history. His walk slower, his words sometimes faltering. To voters, doubts about his age were growing. Inside the party, strategists feared one bad debate, one bad moment, could sink everything. Yet few dared to say it aloud. The alternative seemed worse. Kamala Harris was unpopular. Governors like Newsom and Whitmer were untested. Senators failed to inspire. And so unease stayed whispers, never action. Editorial boards fretted, donors hesitated, and behind closed doors, even allies admitted the risk. Still, the White House dismissed concerns, Jill Biden brushed them off, and Biden himself insisted only he could beat Trump. The question lingered, haunting every Democrat. Are we sure this is a good idea? But silence won out, and soon the cost of that silence would be impossible to ignore. Chapter 10. Dean Phillips. While most Democrats stayed silent, one little-known congressman from Minnesota broke ranks. His name was Dean Phillips. Phillips wasn't a national figure, a wealthy businessman turned politician, pragmatic, affable, but hardly a heavyweight. Yet he said what others only whispered: Joe Biden should not run again. He argued the party was risking everything by clinging to an aging president. America needed a new generation. His words struck a nerve, because deep down, many agreed. They just wouldn't say it. Party insiders dismissed him as unserious, even reckless. But his rebellion revealed the cracks. Donors uneasy, governors circling, lawmakers privately worried. Phillips gave voice to what Democrats feared most, that Biden's candidacy was a trap. Dean Phillips never had a real shot at the nomination, but his challenge mattered. It proved the doubts were real, and it showed just how fragile the Democratic unity around Biden truly was. Chapter 11, 2024. The year 2024 was supposed to be Biden's redemption. Instead, it became the year denial met reality. The campaign launched with forced optimism. Biden's team argued he'd beaten Trump once and could do it again. But polls told another story. Voters were uneasy, independents slipping, swing states tilting red. Inside the party, doubts deepened. Yet there was no open contest, no new leader waiting in the wings. Democrats had cleared the field for Biden. Silence was unity, but it was also a trap. Meanwhile, Trump roared ahead, his rallies packed, his message sharpened. Against him, Biden looked tired, diminished, and overmanaged. Every stumble, every viral clip fed the narrative. He was too old, too frail, too late. 2024 was no longer about ideas or achievements. It was about endurance. And for Biden, the clock was already running out. Chapter 12. D-Day. June 27, 2024. Atlanta. Biden's team had promised strength, clarity, and command. Instead, America saw collapse. From the moment he walked on stage, the signs were there. Stiff steps, a weary face, a fading voice. Within minutes, it unraveled. He stumbled, froze mid-sentence, but lost his train of thought. Trump barely needed to attack. As Biden faltered before millions of viewers, clips spread instantly. The hoarse voice, the blank stare, the silence. Inside Democratic circles, panic exploded. Donors called non-stop. Lawmakers texted in shock. Allies whispered the unthinkable. He can't do this. Years of denial collapsed in 90 minutes. The campaign tried to spin it as just a bad night. Jill Biden insisted he had done fine. But for the public, the damage was irreversible. That debate was Biden's political D-Day. The night faith gave way to fear, and the illusion of strength shattered before the world. Chapter 13. The Verdict. Summer 2024. For Joe Biden, the blows came from every direction, personal and political, private and public. The chapter of his downfall was about to be written. In Wilmington, the Bidens filled the courtroom benches. Jill, Valerie, Ashley, forced to watch family wounds laid bare. Hunter faced charges for lying on a gun form, insisting he wasn't using drugs when evidence showed otherwise. The jury heard everything: exes testifying, private messages, even Hunter's own memoir turned against him. For the family, it was humiliation. For the president, unbearable guilt. Biden told friends, "None of this would be happening if I hadn't run." On June 11th, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. Another trial loomed for taxes. Biden hugged his son on the tarmac, silent, broken. The president, who had built his life on family, was now watching his own unravel in public. And then, a shock that shook the nation. At a rally near Butler, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump was nearly assassinated. A crack of gunfire. Panic. One supporter killed, 2 wounded. The shooter gunned down by Secret Service snipers. A bullet grazed Trump's ear, blood running down his face. Then came the image that defined the campaign. Trump, bloodied but unbowed, fist pumping defiantly in the air. It was a moment bigger than politics. To his supporters, he became not just a candidate, but a survivor. A man marked by destiny. To his critics, a nightmare, martyrdom made flesh. For Biden, the contrast was devastating. While he sat in courtrooms, broken by family scandal, Trump stood on stage, bloodied but unbroken. The verdict of the moment was clear. One man fading, the other defiant. The chapter called The Verdict wasn't just about Hunter. It was about Biden himself, a father crushed, a president diminished, and an opponent reborn in fire. Chapter 14. The Debate. For millions watching at home, June 27th was shocking. But for those inside the campaign, the debate wasn't just a bad night. It was the nightmare they had feared and failed to prevent. Biden's advisors had fought for this early debate, convinced it would prove his strength. Behind the scenes, staff rehearsed him relentlessly, scripting answers, trimming his workload, praying for clarity. They thought preparation could mask decline. But once the cameras rolled, all the prep collapsed. In the war room, aides stared in silence as Biden froze, stumbled, and lost his train of thought. Donors watching at home flooded phones with frantic calls. Lawmakers texted each other in disbelief. This is over. The spin effort began immediately. Staff pushed out lines about a cold, a scratchy throat, just one bad night. Jill Biden insisted he'd done fine, but even inside the bubble, few believed it. One strategist later admitted, "We knew then. This was it. The end." The debate didn't just expose Biden to voters. It exposed his team's failure, their choice to shield him, to deny the decline, to hope faith could beat time. And when the illusion shattered, there was no backup plan. Chapter 15. The World Reacts. The morning after the debate, America wasn't asking who won. It was asking, what happened to Joe Biden? Headlines were brutal. Cable networks replayed his stumbles on a loop. Online, the clips went viral. The blank stares, the broken sentences. What had been whispers of decline became undeniable fact. Donors froze checks. Governors and lawmakers whispered urgently, could he even stay in the race? Allies abroad watched with alarm. Adversaries watched with satisfaction. Inside the Biden family, denial held firm. Jill insisted he'd done fine. Staff called it just a bad night. But for Democrats across the country, it wasn't one night. It was confirmation. The world had given its verdict. Biden's decline was no longer a secret to manage. It was a crisis to survive. Chapter 16. The Bad Times. After the debate, Democrats had one name for the weeks that followed: the bad times. Polls collapsed. Donors pulled back. Editorial boards called for Biden to step aside. Each day brought new headlines, new panic, new despair. Inside the White House, Biden bristled. Jill urged him to keep fighting, insisting he'd risen from setbacks before. But staff saw the truth. The president was wounded, stubborn, and running out of road. Party strategists whispered about disaster. Not just losing the White House, but dragging down the Senate, the House, the entire party. For Biden, resilience had always been the answer. But now his refusal to quit wasn't lifting him up. It was pulling everyone else down. Chapter 17. Joy. In the middle of collapse, the Bidens clung to one word: joy. For Joe, joy came from family. Dinners with Jill, visits from Hunter and Ashley, laughter with his grandchildren. In those small moments, he felt steady, even as his presidency unraveled. Jill spoke of it constantly on the trail, insisting her husband still found joy in service, in the fight, in life itself. It was their shield against criticism, their mantra against despair. But joy couldn't stop the polls from plunging. It couldn't silence the calls for him to step aside. It was love, not strategy, a comfort, but not a cure. For Biden, joy was survival. But survival was no longer enough. The end was closing in. Chapter 18. Out the door. Joe Biden built his life on one creed: never quit. But in July 2024, he faced the moment he could no longer avoid: stepping aside. The pressure was crushing. Donors gone, polls collapsing, governors whispering openly. Even allies admitted staying in meant certain defeat. For Biden, dropping out felt like betrayal. His father's voice, "Get up," had carried him through every tragedy. But this time, getting up meant letting go. In a somber address, he announced he would not seek re-election. He framed it as sacrifice, not surrender, a choice for party and country over self. Relief swept Democrats. They could finally move forward. But for Biden, it was heartbreak. The presidency he fought for all his life ending not with triumph, but retreat. Out the door, Biden left as he came, a man of resilience. But this time, resilience had carried him too far, into a battle he could no longer win. Chapter 19. Conclusions. Every tragedy has a cause. In 2024, it was Biden's original sin, running again when he shouldn't have. His greatest strength had always been resilience. He got up after stumbles, after loss, after grief. But in the end, that same resilience became stubbornness. Loyalty turned into denial. And silence, from his family, from his aides, from his party, sealed the fate. The Democrats had a choice. They could have confronted the truth early, made room for new leadership. Instead, they circled around him, convinced only Biden could stop Trump. By the time reality hit, it was too late. Trump was back. Biden was out. And the party was left shattered by the very man who once promised to be its bridge to the future. The lesson is brutal, but clear. Democracies don't just collapse from enemies without, but from truths left unspoken within. Biden's fall wasn't just his own, it was shared by everyone who saw the decline and chose silence. Joe Biden's story is not of malice, but of inevitability, of what happens when resilience hardens into denial. Original sin is a warning for every democracy. Thank you for listening. This has been a PastCast production, where we bring you the voices, stories, and choices that shape our world. If you found this audiobook review insightful, don't forget to share it, subscribe, and join us next time for more PastCast stories that make sense of history in motion.